Hello and welcome back to Bookshelf Core. If you're new here, I am Soph and this is my cozy corner on the internet. And since it's the end of the year, or shall I say the beginning of 2022, I thought I would share with you how I've managed to read 74 books over the last year. And I also started about 5 that I never finished. When I go onto my story graph, as you can see, I read 74 books, 25,000 pages. And most of my books were under 500 pages. I have been reading consistently for the last 1.5 years. I started at some point throughout the first lockdown, and I made a habit out of it, and now I cannot imagine just not reading any books. So here are some of my top 10 tips on how I've managed to read 74 books last year. So tip number 1 will be to read what you enjoy reading. And that sounds so simple, but it is truly important to read the books that you enjoy and not the books that you think you should be reading or should be enjoying. I had this problem with classics where I started reading classics in the beginning of last year, and because everybody had been saying that, you have to read classics, they're classics for a reason, and I ended up not enjoying them that much, especially since English is not my first language, and reading classics from the Victorian era in the original English is quite hard for me. I just don't enjoy them nearly as much. I still read classics, I try to go through them because I know they're very important and they're classics for a reason, but I would not say that I read them as often as other people would. So last year I've only read, I think, 2 classics, which also brings me to tip number 2, which is do not be scared to stop reading the books if you don't enjoy them. I've started 5 or 6 books and I stopped reading them about 10% through. That's more or less how much I give my books. If I don't like them by the first 10%, I just stop reading them altogether. That is mostly because, first of all, there are so many books out there that you can actually read and are much better. And second of all, if you're gonna power through it and you're gonna finish these books that you absolutely hate, you're actually gonna get into this bookish hangover mood where you just don't want to pick up any books at all after that. Not finishing books is a very important thing in order to actually read more books. I know it sounds weird, but it really does help. Tip number 3 will be to skip the things that you do not enjoy in a book. And that might sound quite controversial, but if you're doing a reread of a book and you know for a fact that you did not enjoy a specific chapter, just skip it. There's no reason for you to read it again if you already know that you don't enjoy it. A good example for me will be The Lord of the Rings. I absolutely love The Lord of the Rings, and The Fellowship of the Ring is my second favourite part, I think. Actually no, it's my least favourite book. It's great anyway, but the thing that I don't really enjoy about The Fellowship of the Ring is the chapter about Tom Bombadil. It's boring, I cannot get through it, and it's super long, and it doesn't actually add anything valid to the storyline. So now whenever I just do a reread of The Fellowship of the Ring, I always just skip it because there is no point. I also tend to skip songs and poems within books because I don't really find them as important. And then also if I'm reading a non-fiction book, which doesn't happen often, but if I am going to go and read a non-fiction book and I find that the author is repetitive or that I'm just not interested in this particular subject that they're writing about in a non-fiction book, I would just skip it. And that's one of the ways how to not just give up on a book completely, but still being able to enjoy it. Tip number 4 is to channel your inner Rory Gilmore and bring a book with you wherever you go. You never know whether you're going to be stuck in traffic, stuck on a train, your appointment's going to be delayed, and all these little minutes do add up throughout the day. So that is quite an important thing, and I've been implementing it in my life, and I take a book with me pretty much wherever I go at this point. Tip number 5 is to make a habit out of reading, and that kind of ties with the previous tip for me because I read a lot during my commute to and from work. I started reading on my commute to university last year when the universities opened up again, and I would commute for about 3 hours a day. I would get through so many books at the beginning, so many books, and it's because I just had so much time to read, and I cannot imagine going anywhere on the train and not having a book with me because it just feels really weird and boring, or like I'm wasting my time. So I really enjoy reading on the trains Right now my commute is about 20 minutes one way, so obviously I don't get nearly as much time for reading. However, I do tend to read during my breaks at work, and I do read right before I go to bed. I know that some people like to read in the mornings. Sometimes if I wake up really early and I have nothing better to do and I feel like I want to read, I would read as well. However, I do tend to read right before I go to bed, and that is also quite an important thing. Reading before you go to bed will calm you down, it will actually make you sleepy, and it will let you fall asleep a lot quicker and easier rather than if you're staring at your phone for like half an hour before you go into bed. Tip number 6 is to use Storygraph, Goodreads, or just a regular notebook to track what you're reading and how much you're reading. And I cannot stress enough how much it has helped me to stay on track with reading, knowing how many books I've read and at what point I read them. It really does motivate you quite a lot if you see that, oh, you know, actually last month I read 6 books. I wouldn't have known that unless I've tracked it. It really does help you if you forget how many books you're reading, or if you don't really pay that much attention to it. Which also brings me to tip number 7, which is to set a challenge for yourself. So every single year, Goodreads and Storygraph, they do a challenge where you can just basically write down the number of books that you want to read. Plus on Storygraph, you can actually set the number of pages you want to read. Setting like a challenge and knowing what you actually want to do and how many books you want to read will help you stay motivated and will help you stay on track. On top of that, both Goodreads and Storygraph, they will send you little reminders if you're behind. Don't stress about it too much, because sometimes you can read a lot of books within a very short period of time, but they will tell you whether you're good on reading or whether you need to speed up a little bit. For example, every single year my goal is to read 52 books in a given year, which is essentially 1 book every single week, and to me it sounds like a very doable thing. The number of books that I read within a week would vary depending on what books I'm reading. However, I feel like 52 books is quite a good number for me with my lifestyle and how much time I have. Tip number 8 is to have a TBR list or TBR shelf. If you're not familiar with the term TBR, it basically means to be read, and it is essentially just a list of books that you feel like you want to read in a given month. I started doing TBRs last year when I joined Bookstagram, and I quickly realized that that actually doesn't work for me, because as soon as I put down the books on the list, I would just not pick them up at all because I am such a mood reader. Instead of that, I have a TBR shelf. So it's just a shelf in my house where I have all the books that I didn't read yet, but I feel like I might want to read within the next 2-3 months or so. And it has really helped me because then I know what books are yet to be read, and I don't have to, you know, look at all the bookshelves that I have trying to figure out what books I should pick up next. Tip number 9 is to not focus on the numbers, because I know it's really easy for us to actually get a bit twisted around the numbers and the idea that we need to read specific amount of books in a year. And this is where Storygraph comes in and is actually a lot helpful. So just quickly scrolling through that. As you can see, in August and September, I read less books than I read the number of pages. And that is because the books that I picked up, they were quite chunkier than the previous books. So even though I read less books in this month, in these 2 months, I actually read more pages. So at the end of the day, if you're really stressed about not reaching your book goal because you really enjoy reading quite chunky books, don't focus on the number of books. You still have the pages, and going through, well, I went through 25,000 of pages last year. It is insane if you think about it. But also at the end of the day, it's all about you having fun and you enjoying the whole reading, rather than just stressing yourself into having to read a certain amount of books. And then final tip is, do not compare yourself to others. And I feel like this is quite a big problem within the Bookstagram and Booktube community, that if you see a lot of people, especially the big accounts, reading 100+ books in a year, you start to feel a bit like a failure because you've only read, I don't know, let's say 20 or 30 books. But the thing that people have to realize is that the majority of these people, they read for a living, so they have a lot more time on their hands. They also probably read a lot faster, and sure, you can learn how to read fast, but I wouldn't say that I necessarily recommend doing that. It's all about you, how much time you have, and what your goal was. I know people who are deciding that instead of reading, let's say, 52 books in a year, because last year they read 20, this year they want to read 21 because they want to be slightly better than previously. And I think that it's really important to just not compare yourself to others and make sure that you're trying to be a better version of yourself and not somebody else. So I hope that makes sense. These were all of my tips on how I managed to read 74 books last year. There's obviously a lot of other things that I could tell you, what I did and what I didn't do, but these are the major ones, and I think they will help you out if you're trying to figure out how to read more books. Like I said, it's all a personal journey and it's all up to everybody. It's an individual thing. You should not be comparing yourself to anybody else, and you should just read for fun and enjoy every minute of it and not make yourself do it. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope that I will see you in my next ones. Bye!